The Young and the Restless spoilers. Matt Clark had always been a threat that lingered like a shadow no one could fully escape, and the tragic truth was that Genoa City never understood just how deep his obsession ran until everything collapsed into one terrifying moment. Operating under the alias Mitch Bacall, he had spent months quietly watching, calculating, feeding the hatred that had never faded from the past. His resentment toward Victor Newman was not just anger anymore. It was a burning ideology, a belief that Victor had taken too much, ruined too many lives, and walked away without ever paying the price. For Matt, the only way to settle the score was to remind Victor of the one vulnerability he could never protect through money, power, or influence: his family. And so the twisted idea took shape, growing into a full-blown plan. Kidnap Nikki Newman, abduct the woman Victor cherished the most, and drag him into a nightmare from which even Victor Newman might not emerge unscathed. What made everything worse was that Matt's mind, already warped by years of cruelty and vengeance, couldn't stop there. Nikki wasn't enough. Victoria wasn't enough. In Matt's eyes, the Newman women were symbols of the empire Victor had built, the empire he wanted to watch burn. If Victor refused to break on his own, Matt would break him by force. What frightened everyone later, when the truth finally came to light, was that Matt's plan was so simple yet so devastatingly effective. He didn't rely on elaborate schemes or a network of accomplices. He waited until just the right moment, when the Newman household was distracted by the relief of Noah and Sienna finally being rescued, their nightmare seemingly over, their family breathing again. In that fragile space of gratitude and exhaustion, he struck. In broad daylight, with terrifying precision, he cornered both Nikki and Victoria in the parking area behind the ranch, his expression cold, his eyes hollow, the look of a man who had crossed the line so far he no longer recognized normal boundaries. Before either woman could process the danger, he forced them at gunpoint into the back of an old, dark sedan he had prepared in advance. Nikki trembled, unable to understand how quickly her world had turned upside down, while Victoria, strong in her business suits, confident in boardrooms, was reduced to shaking breaths and desperate attempts to keep her mother calm. Matt thrived on that fear. He relished it. To him, their panic meant Victor would suffer. The drive that followed became a nightmare no one would forget. The car sped down the highway at an erratic pace, Matt gripping the wheel tightly, muttering to himself as though waging war with invisible demons. Nikki and Victoria screamed for help whenever another vehicle passed, but Matt's threats were enough to silence them. He didn't care if they cried. He didn't care if they begged. He wanted them afraid, because fear would echo through Victor's world like a warning shot. What made the situation even more horrifying was that neither Nikki nor Victoria could tell what Matt intended to do next. Was he taking them to a remote hideout? A warehouse? Somewhere to bargain? Somewhere to kill? No one knew, and Matt's unstable behavior made the outcome even more unpredictable. Meanwhile, back in Genoa City, Victor's world shattered. One moment he was assuring the family that Noah and Sienna were safe, trying to believe that the worst of their troubles had passed. The next moment he received the call that Nikki and Victoria were missing, vanished without a trace, and something in him snapped. Victor Newman had faced countless enemies in his lifetime, men with ambition, greed, power, and money, but Matt Clark was different. Matt was pure obsession, pure spite, the embodiment of a ghost Victor never fully exorcised. And now that ghost had come back to take the two people Victor loved most. The panic that hit Victor was unlike anything the Newman family had seen before. His voice broke, his anger exploded, and for the first time in years, he looked genuinely afraid. Everyone around him, Nick, Abby, Adam, Sharon, Chance, felt the tension in their bones. If Victor Newman, the indestructible titan of Genoa City, was afraid, the situation had to be catastrophic. As hours passed, chaos consumed the ranch. Search teams were deployed. Security footage was pulled. Helicopters scanned the roads. Victor barked orders, Nick nearly collapsed in guilt and fear, and Adam, usually calm in crises, looked as though he might implode from the pressure. The entire Newman empire stopped functioning. Business calls were ignored. Deals were abandoned. The only objective was finding Nikki and Victoria before Matt Clark turned an abduction into a massacre. Rumors spread fast. Some believed Matt wanted a ransom, others believed he wanted leverage to expose Victor publicly, but the darkest whispers suggested something far more sinister. Matt wanted Victor to feel the pain of loss, the same pain he believed Victor once caused him. Inside the speeding car, Nikki felt her heartbeat pounding like a drum in her ears. She tried to talk to Matt, to reason with him, but her voice quivered too much to sound convincing. Victoria, trying to be strong for them both, studied Matt's movements, hoping for an opening, any opening, to escape. But every time she shifted even slightly, Matt's head snapped back with a warning glare. The claustrophobic space filled with the scent of gasoline, the hum of the engine, and the suffocating realization that they were at the mercy of a man who no longer cared about consequences. His breathing was uneven, his grip on the wheel tightening every time he muttered Victor's name under his breath. For a moment, Victoria wondered if Matt even remembered they were in the car or if they had become nothing more than symbols in his twisted revenge against her father. Yet what none of them knew was that Matt was unraveling faster than he realized. The plan he had rehearsed 1,000 times in his mind began collapsing under the weight of his own instability. He wanted revenge, but he also wanted escape, and he no longer knew which desire was louder. The contradictions gnawed at him. Should he kill them? Keep them alive to torment Victor? Use them as bargaining chips? Every option clashed and tangled in his mind until even he couldn't control his thoughts. His rage made him dangerous, but his confusion made him unpredictable, and unpredictability was the most terrifying element of all. In the Newman household, Victor understood this better than anyone. He knew Matt wasn't rational enough to negotiate. He wasn't driven by money or power anymore, he was driven by ego and delusion. Victor realized the horrifying truth that if Matt sensed the police approaching or believed the plan was failing, he might panic, and in that panic, he might kill Nikki and Victoria without hesitation. And still, through all this chaos, the family held on to one fragile anchor. Noah and Sienna were safe. Their rescue had brought a flicker of hope in a moment drowning in fear. It reminded the Newmans that victory was possible, that even in the darkest twists of fate, someone could still come home alive. But hope alone wouldn't be enough. Not when Matt Clark was behind the wheel of a stolen car, driving toward an unknown fate with 2 Newman women trapped in the back seat. As the story unfolded, Genoa City could only hold its breath. Victor's fury transformed into a ruthless determination, the same fierce instinct that built his empire now refocused on saving the people he loved. Matt's grip on reality loosened with every mile he drove. Nikki's tears fell silently as she prayed for a miracle, and Victoria, terrified yet resilient, searched for a moment to fight back. The tension mounted, the lines between life and death blurred, and the frightening truth emerged: Matt Clark hadn't just kidnapped 2 women. He had restarted a war Victor Newman thought he ended decades ago, a war fueled not by power, but by vengeance so scorched and personal that no one in the Newman circle would ever forget the day Matt Clark returned to finish what he believed was unfinished business. Inside the speeding car, the world outside blurred into streaks of color, but inside the cramped backseat Nikki and Victoria could feel every second stretch out like an eternity, each breath coming with the sickening realization that Matt Clark, trembling, muttering, half lost inside his own rage, was unraveling faster than the road unfolding before him. Panic pressed into Nikki's ribs like a vice, her pulse thudding so violently she feared Matt would hear it and turn on her with another vicious glare, but she forced herself not to collapse under the terror. She had been through darkness before: alcohol relapses, stalkers, gunmen, illnesses, and every battle had carved resilience into her bones. Next to her, Victoria steadied herself with slow, controlled breathing, the kind she had learned to rely on in hostile boardrooms when facing monstrous competitors, but this was different. No amount of executive poise could prepare her for being trapped at gunpoint with a man whose mind shifted like sand, a man both calculated and chaotic, a man who no longer distinguished punishment from execution. She studied the car with sharp eyes, absorbing details. The broken lock, the rust near the window frame, the child safety latch forcing the doors shut from the inside, and the small jagged edge of metal exposed near the upholstery that might, just might, become the key to their survival. Victoria leaned subtly toward Nikki, whispering without sound, only with her eyes, "We will get out." But Matt's rearview mirror caught even the slightest movement, and he snapped, slamming his hand against the dashboard, sending both women shrinking back in fear. His voice cracked into a half-scream, half-groan, calling Victor's name like a curse hurled into the wind. Nikki felt tears sting her eyes, not from weakness but from the crushing realization that Matt didn't see them as human anymore. They were pieces. Objects. Collateral meant to pierce Victor's heart. If he lost control completely, there would be nothing left to negotiate with. The car swerved abruptly, jerking them sideways, and Victoria's shoulder slammed into the door hard enough to make a quiet metallic clink, the same spot she had noticed earlier. Through the pain, she felt the glimmer of opportunity. The metal edge beneath the weather stripping was real. Sharp. If she could pry it loose without Matt noticing, she might be able to slice through the binding zip tie around her wrist. But the risk was suffocating. Every move had to be calculated with the precision of a surgeon. She steadied her breathing, waiting for a moment when Matt became distracted by his own spiraling thoughts. That moment came sooner than expected. Matt's hands tightened on the steering wheel as he launched into a rant at no one, his voice bouncing between fury and despair. He shouted about betrayal, about Victor taking everything from him, about being forgotten while the Newmans continued to thrive. His voice cracked with raw, deranged emotion, giving Victoria the smallest window she needed. She shifted again, small, almost imperceptible, letting her wrist glide against the jagged metal. The first swipe tore her skin, but she didn't flinch. Pain was nothing now, survival was everything. She continued, slow and steady, scraping, slicing, grinding the plastic zip tie against the edge until faint threads began to loosen. Nikki noticed the faint movement and felt hope flicker inside her chest like a fragile flame. She held her breath, praying Matt wouldn't glance back. But the universe tested them immediately. Matt slammed the brakes as he approached a rural intersection, and both women jolted violently, forcing Victoria to freeze mid-action. The zip tie was halfway severed, close, but not enough. Matt's furious eyes shot into the mirror, and Nikki's heart nearly stopped when their gazes met. His breath grew heavier, his expression like a predator sensing rebellion. Nikki knew she had one chance, and she took it. She spoke. Her voice was soft, trembling, but strategically timed, just before Matt's anger could fully ignite. "Please," she whispered, "don't hurt us." She kept her tone small, controlled, not because she wanted to appear weak, but because she understood Matt's psychology. He fed on fear, but he reacted violently to defiance. Distracting him was their only shield and their only weapon. Matt snarled something incoherent, smashing his palm against the steering wheel again before speeding forward, the engine roaring as if echoing his disintegrating mental state. Victoria's fingers returned to work, slowly, carefully, cutting through the remaining fibers of the binding zip tie. Blood pooled along her wrist from the earlier slip, but she kept pushing, feeling the plastic give way little by little. Her heart pounded. She forced herself not to rush. Precision. Timing. Survival. When the final strand snapped, she held back her instinct to rip her arms free and jump into action. The wrong movement would get them killed. She needed to pretend the restraints were still intact. She waited. Matt ranted again, louder this time, his voice echoing inside the car like a cracked bell. He drove faster, the tires screeching around sharp bends as if he wanted to outrun his own thoughts. Nikki squeezed her eyes shut, praying silently, bargaining with fate, hoping Victor, Nick, Adam, anyone, someone, would find them soon. But Victoria saw what Nikki couldn't. The road ahead was narrowing, leading into a more remote area. The farther Matt drove, the fewer chances they had. It had to be now. An opportunity came when Matt fumbled for something in the front seat, a phone, a lighter, a folded piece of paper Victoria didn't know. His attention drifted for 3 seconds, maybe 4. It was enough. She slid both hands behind her back and quietly snapped the loose zip tie apart, freeing her wrists completely. Her skin throbbed from the cuts, but she felt a rush of clarity. A plan clicked into place. She needed a weapon. Her eyes darted quickly. There, a metal pen on the floor near the seatbelt buckle, likely dropped by Matt earlier. If she could reach it, she could defend herself, defend Nikki, force Matt to lose control of the car long enough for them to escape. But every second risked Matt's notice. She shifted her foot slightly, hooking the pen with the tip of her shoe, dragging it closer. She froze when Matt's head twitched. His breathing accelerated. His knuckles whitened around the wheel, and he began muttering Victor's name again. Nikki felt panic crawling up her spine, but she kept her expressions neutral, afraid that any flicker of movement could doom them both. Then it happened. Matt saw a police helicopter in the distant sky. A small speck, but enough to trigger a violent reaction. He cursed loudly, slamming the accelerator. The car lurched, sending Nikki and Victoria crashing back into their seats. In that violent motion, the pen slid perfectly into Victoria's reach, landing against her palm. She grasped it instantly, hiding it behind her thigh. Her pulse raced. This was their moment, but they needed one more opportunity. And then the universe provided it. Matt made a hard left turn onto a dirt road, the tires skidding across gravel, kicking dust into the air. The car fishtailed wildly before stabilizing, the sudden movement forcing Matt to use both hands on the wheel to regain control. For the first time since the abduction began, he wasn't watching the mirror. Action surged through Victoria's body like a lightning strike. She lunged. Her hand shot forward, slamming the pen into Matt's shoulder. Not deep enough to kill, but sharp enough to shock him, to make him lose control. Matt screamed, jerking the wheel violently. The car swerved, spinning sideways in a chaotic spiral. Nikki braced herself, gripping the seat as the entire world tilted. The sedan skidded across gravel, bounced into a shallow ditch, rattled violently, and finally crashed against a small embankment with a thunderous metallic crack that echoed across the empty countryside. The impact knocked the breath from all three of them. For a moment the world went silent except for the ticking of the engine and the faint ringing in their ears. Dust swirled through the shattered air like smoke. Victoria's vision blurred, but her instincts roared, "Move." She pushed herself up with trembling arms, her entire body aching from the crash. Next to her, Nikki struggled but remained conscious, her eyes filled with terror, but also a strange, shining determination. Matt, bleeding from the shoulder, groaned in the driver's seat as he tried to reach for the gun that had fallen near the pedals. Victoria saw it at the same time he did, and adrenaline surged through her. She grabbed Nikki by the arm, pulling her toward the broken rear window. "Go," she whispered, not a word spoken aloud, but the meaning was clear in her eyes. Nikki climbed through the shards, cutting her leg but refusing to stop. Victoria followed, her heart thundering, lungs burning, skidding onto the dirt. Before Matt could gather himself, before he could find the gun or regain his senses, the Newman women were running through the dusty embankment, running toward the tree line, running for their lives. Behind them, Matt roared in fury. But ahead of them, for the first time since the kidnapping began, there was hope.